Let us pray. Most Holy Christ, speak to us this night. And may we have ears to hear. Amen. Good evening. You are a beautiful sight. And you can call me old-fashioned, but I actually like it when the clergy dress up and come out prancing like they did. I like that a lot. They are a fine-looking group, and more than that, they're some of the finest priests that I've known, and I want to thank them tonight. But tonight we're gathered, as we're always gathered, as baptized people, for we all are that. Living our baptism, that is our theme for our convention, but quite frankly, that is our theme as Christians, or at least I would dare say it should be, living our baptism. To live it, we have to know what it is. And as with any sacrament, that is not always easy. Sacraments, by their very nature, do not beg to be understood as much as discovered. They do beg to be known, but mostly through experience and not by knowledge. So while it is a theme for this convention, it is also going to be a theme for our coming life together during this next year. We are post-election, and I have to say, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, perhaps we could find some unity in the sentiment, "Aren't you glad it's over?" I was reminded in preparing this with our theme, Living Our Baptism, of a quote by H.L. Mencken. He said, "A national political campaign is better than the best circus ever heard of, with a mass baptism and a couple of hangings thrown in. We can be together and being happy that circus has ended." I want to greet each and every one of you and thank you for giving of your time to be here. I want to greet you if you are a guest in our midst, and most especially I want to greet our special guest, the Right Reverend J. Magnus, Suffragan Bishop for Federal Ministries and the Armed Forces. I'll tell you more about Bishop Magnus as I introduce him to you later in this convention, but let me say this now. In his consecration, which I attended at the National Cathedral, Bishop Ted Gulick preached, someone Jay worked with him for a long time, and someone I count as a good friend in the House of Bishops too. And he said this in his sermon about Bishop Magnus: "He is the hardest working person I know. And I will tell you, there is no more arduous post than his, and all I have witnessed in his ministry so far is the deep truth of what Bishop Gulick said that day. We are so blessed that he could be with us for these 2 days, and I would ask that you help me welcome him into our midst." As we gather, we do not forget the suffering that goes on east of us on the other coast as they continue to clean up after Sandy and now heavy snow and cold. Many of them are fellow Episcopalians, and we send our prayers out to all of them from this our home. Living our baptism. Such addresses are never easy. They're an amalgamation of many, many things. When I think of baptism, I always think of one of my favorite movies of all times, Tender Mercies, with Robert Duvall. There's a scene when he and the son of his love interest, Tess Harper, are baptized, and afterwards, riding home in the front of the truck, the boy asks Duvall, "Do you feel different?" And after a bit of a pause, Duvall says, smiling not quite like he had any other time in the movie, with a look that said yes, he smiles and says, "No, son, I don't. I reckon that will take some time." I have watched that scene over and over through the years and have wondered if it was not that Duvall's character Mac wasn't answering the question, but that it was the wrong question. I don't know, but what his words said did not match his eyes, or even so his life from that point on. What he said is right on. I reckon it will take some time. living it. I liked it because he got what is the real miracle of baptism, not magic, not some insurance policy you are given, but a call to a new life. It is the place each of us takes the step into a way of living, but it never marks a finished product, but instead the beginning of a new walk, a new way. So the question I always wonder might have been asked here is not, do you feel different, but rather, are you different? That's the question I would want us to sit with, carry from here, live with. Are you different? Are we different? That's a deep question that we have to keep asking throughout our lives. If I try to answer it as your bishop, for us as a body, a collective, I would have to answer after these last 5 years, yes, we are different. I don't think we're always right, but we're certainly different. At our last convention, your standing committee and I introduced the idea of a comprehensive strategic review, which would be facilitated by Russ Crabtree with Holy Cow Consulting and the author of The Fly in the Ointment, Why Denominations Aren't Helping Their Congregations and How They Can. As most of you have to be aware by now, we did that and have completed his work, and he will report to this convention. And I want to thank Russ, and I want to thank all of you and countless others who came out to be part of this important work. As you will hear from Russ, we have the best return rate he's ever experienced, and the results are quite promising and positive. He recently presented to our governing bodies and regional leadership, and he will present to you as well. All of his data will soon be available to you and to anyone in this diocese who wants to read it. He will be presenting data that suggests we are different, and in some good ways. There is lots of data, but beyond the overarching themes he found, I have asked that he focus on one statement he made to us at that meeting, that while we are, as a diocese, in an excellent position to move to the next thing, primed for change, we cannot rely on what has worked so far to get us there. Said another way, what brought us to this point will not get us to the next one. So with Russ's help and what he helped us learn about ourselves, we will shift. You will see the handoff right before your eyes here at this convention to Greg Rhodes, who, along with a hand-selected group of people from across this diocese, will take the next leg of the journey where we look outside ourselves and try to find the gaps, the disconnects with who we say we are and what the world needs of us. Somewhere in that gap is our mission for the years ahead. To live our baptism is to search relentlessly for just that, the gap that exists in reaching the world, the one we follow Jesus Christ asks us to reach, to minister to tend and care for, in an effort to create a kingdom of justice, peace, and reconciliation. You will again be asked to be part of that, and I'm pleading with you to do so. We cannot let down now, for we are called to a bold mission and a quest, which is ours to steward in this generation. All this is in preparation for what I've said to you since I first met you. I plan to stay in service to you in this office for about 12 years, maybe a bit more, or until you've had it with me, whichever comes first. And I know for some of you that time came and went. Somehow the number of years have not always been clear. I had a person say to me the other day, "You've been here 5 years, didn't you say you were leaving?" I hate to disappoint. Wishful thinking, I guess. But I do believe a system needs to change after that amount of time, and still intend to do that for you at about 12. I have no idea what I will do, but I have great faith the way will be revealed. It's difficult to believe that when we gather next convention, we will be halfway to that time. And in that first 6 years, I've been fairly upfront and clear about what I saw you ask for in the profile and what brought me here to be with you. And we have done well in following those. And I've been very overwhelmed by the tremendous willingness and dedication to those areas. And now as we approach the last half of that time, I'm convinced that this becomes more of yours to do, more of yours to direct, and for all of us together to envision where our current good place calls us to move. That work, that transition is to me a deep way that we will live our baptism. So, after 5 years and moving into our 6th year together, I'm also going on a much-needed sabbatical. I'll be taking 4 months as part of my letter of agreement from July 1st to October 31st of next year. When we gather next year for convention, I will be fresh back from the sabbatical, hopefully with many stories to tell and new learnings to share, and to guide me into that second half of our time together. Sabbatical to me has become too often a vacation, which is not really what it's meant to be. Sabbatical is not vacation, but certainly can and should be refreshing, different. Sabbatical is not time off work, but it is time away, time to do something that you could never do in the normal course of your work, but yet hopefully it will affect and enrich your work once you return to it. So with that in mind, my main focus for my sabbatical will be refining and improving my use of the Spanish language. And anyone who has heard my version of it knows that will be time well spent. My family and I intend to start that journey with an immersion experience at the School of the World on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica in July, where they ask that you take up 2 things, not just the language, but something else. And so I'm going to undertake something that has always fascinated me and also scares me to death. I figure a sabbatical is for that too. So I'm not just taking Spanish, I'm also taking surfing. That's right, catching the big one. Or in this case, the big one catching me, more than likely. At this point, my greatest hope is to come back, alive. In one piece. I was actually inspired to this notion by my leading of a retreat in the Diocese of El Camino Real, a retreat for young male clergy. There had been one before us for young female clergy led by Bishop Mary Gray Reeves, and she asked me to lead this one. It was a tremendous blessing, and in that group were several surfers who talked about riding the waves, the balance, the skill in catching the right one, and they used that as a metaphor for what we're trying to do with the church and our calls for ministry in it. Now, this is going to be a challenge. I don't think I can walk a straight line and pass a sobriety test after drinking iced tea. So the whole balance thing is going to be a challenge. But that's what a sabbatical is all about. It will be interesting, to say the least. It will be different. I also hope to do some more study on the history of the First Nations people in our diocese and to learn ways we may reconcile that history and make it brighter in the years to come. I promise to report on a regular basis, and the planning for my time away is in good place right now with staff. In this convention, you've already heard about the Bricks for Haiti campaign. And I want to thank Jennifer Dougherty again for her leadership in that, taking such a huge task and doing it with such finesse and grace and dedication. Some have asked what we will do for this coming year, and for this year we're going to take a bit of a different tack. This year, led by our Canon for Stewardship and Development, Lance Owsley, we're going to take a serious look at Episcopal Charities Appeal, ECA. In the years past, we have focused on a special mission to fund as a diocesan effort. However, this year, we want to do something that emphasizes living our baptism through service that reflects the calling that we've been given as the church. So one of the many ways we're striving to do this is through revisioning our Episcopal Charities Appeal ministry and becoming more fully Episcopal Community Action, still ECA. Over the course of the year, we're urging each of our congregations to be more deeply involved through service in these and other outreach ministries, while we continue this year to have our Lenten and holiday appeals to fund the grants for these ministries. We want to focus on Episcopal community action as we are living our baptism. This will be an important part of our revisioning of this ministry. We know that as this ministry structure is transformed, we too will be transformed by the ministry of service we all do across our great diocese. For years, many of you have been generous, and we've been able to fund many ministries through that generosity. But as we look around the church at other similar dioceses and similar efforts, such as our ECA, we see room for improvement and capacity for increase in that generosity. And so in the next year, as we live into our baptismal promises, we're going to give a special focus to that work and the strength we can bring the needs of this world through our collective gifts and work. So on my piece of paper here, it says you could leave this out. Some of you are wishing I did. But I feel compelled to mention something here that many would say I'd be better to leave well enough alone. But when I consider our theme, Living Our Baptism, I can't. In this election just passed, we witnessed again the great division in our country, the 50-50 world we live in. Sadly, we see this in the church as well. If I see anything and have grieved anything in my time as a bishop, I see that, and this is a place where we often are not different. And I want to call that out. I want to call us to responsibility for it. We will disagree, often vehemently, but our baptism, our vows we make in those waters, call us to handling those conflicts in different and better ways than we often witness in the press or in the world. Thomas Merton, that great monk, once remarked, as soon as God puts you in one monastery, you want to be in another. We too are often fickle, and our attempts at reconciling are often too shallow to do true honor to our brother Jesus. Folks, we have just got to work harder at that. Merton went on to say, we're not at peace with others because we're not at peace with ourselves. And we're not at peace with ourselves because we're not at peace with God. I was reminded of some of this by watching a piece on Dylan Klebold's mother. Most of you will remember that name. Klebold, one of the shooters in Columbine. I remember being a rector then and preaching a sermon centered around the story which recounted that someone had put crosses up for all those that died at Columbine, which meant that the shooters had crosses too. Someone in the middle of the night cut those down, the crosses for the shooters. In my sermon, I stated that if there is any truth to the grace of God, then at some point those crosses would have to be put back up, as difficult as that is. And I will tell you, I can't imagine, not begin to imagine how difficult that would be, how long. Maybe in a lifetime it wouldn't be so, but if grace be true, then surely someday, in some time, those crosses would go back up. And what was interesting is I would rank the heat I took for that sermon up there in the top 5 of heat taking in my vocation. Klebold's mother, who has remained quiet now the spotlight since those days, was speaking of being the mother to someone so villainized. She said that one of the most difficult things for her during that time was that the belief by so many, and many of those Christians, that her grief and loss wasn't valid because her son had no value. She went on to say, I know it would have been better for the world if he had never been born, but I have to say it would not have been better for me. We need to find it in ourselves to be more gentle with one another, and to start from a place which realizes the worth of that blessed human we so want to demonize, and for every good reason may have made you as angry as you have ever been, because we're called to be different. The world needs some difference like that. If we are called to anything in baptism, we're called to that. What is born of the flesh is flesh. What is born of the Spirit is spirit. Living our baptism. Some years ago, I was blessed to go to Rome, and I stood in the baptistry at St. John Lateran. And above that baptistry, inscribed all around the top of what surrounds that, is a quote from Leo the Great from 461. For ages, people have come to the waters there to be changed, to be made different, to begin their new journey into the faith. And it is translated as this: Here, in spirit-soaked fertility, a brood destined for another city, begotten by God's blowing and born upon this torrent by the church, their virgin mother. Reborn in these depths, they reach for heaven's realm. The born but once unknown by felicity, this spring is life that floods the world, the wounds of Christ, its awesome source. Sinner, sink beneath this sacred surf that swallows age and spits up youth. Sinner, here, scour sin away down to innocence. For they know no enmity, who are by one font, one spirit, one faith, made one. Sinner, shudder not at sin's kind and number, but those born here are holy. So I'm going to the font we've set up here to finish. Now, in a lot of your churches, the font, I don't know where it is. Sometimes I find it in a closet or somewhere else. And I'm not telling you, oh, the bishop said go back and change all the furniture. But I am telling you this belief I have that the font ought to be in our way. It ought to be in our way. Now, I know why we move it sometimes. We put it up at the front so people can see. But I got to tell you, we used to go to the river, and you couldn't move the river. You just went there. You went to the water. In my first church, one of the battles I had was brides who wanted the font moved out of the way so that their train would not get tangled up in it. So I told my sexton, nail that sucker down. Nail it down. We're not moving the font. It's supposed to be in your way. That's what this is for. That's the reminder. The reminder. Now, some of you heard me tell this story before. I was good at furniture rearrangement. And then I learned what it meant. When I was in seminary, I tutored an 8th grader. I ended up going back to that church to be the rector after almost a decade. And that person I had tutored was in prison. And I would counsel with his mother on a regular basis, you got to tell this community, because she didn't want them to know. I said, that's what this community's for, to support you. But she didn't want to do it. And finally one day she came and said, I want you to do it. I want you to do it because I need something. The parole board's taking his case up, and they want to know there's a community that's going to accept him, take him in, work with him. So we told the congregation, he's in prison. This is why. I said, there's a letter on the pulpit. Any of you want to sign it, line up. And let me remind you of something. When he was baptized 18 years ago, you answered this question. Will you do all in your power to support this person in their life in Christ? Folks, it's payday. It's payday. And they lined up for 25 minutes and signed that letter. And that's when I went from furniture rearranger to understanding the theology of why it's so important that it's there. Now I'm going to tell you one more story. You need to go to St. Paul's Queen Anne, because they just built a monstrosity baptismal font in their lobby. I mean, it's really different. Now, I think Melissa's turned this into that it was designed this way, but I don't know. I think the designer was someone else. But what they figured out is when somebody gets in that font to do an immersion, the water, it doesn't just overflow, which is what they wanted. It bursts out. And this stream that comes out of it goes straight for the front doors. Just like we're supposed to. It's a great reminder. And I love that font because there ain't nobody moving it, I'm telling you. It is right where it is. Pressing water out towards the door where we're supposed to go. That's not an easy thing. This is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for me. But it is what we're called to be different. And if we're going to take this seriously, living our baptism, it's going to be serious business. It's going to not just be change we have to accept. It's going to be something that changes us. That's what this is.